That is what I worked at when I went to Bible college. I had a double major in Bible and history. And what I have spent my life doing. And in my writing, it's obvious if you look at the books that I have, and we'll say a little bit about them in the morning service. And when I got my chance to teach history, it was something I really wanted to do. I had been in Bible college. I graduated at 21. A year later, the college was starting a new college year, Indiana Baptist College over in Indianapolis, Indiana. And they had this wonderful professor, a wonderful man, and he was just your ideal college professor. He was, at the time, he was 85. He had pastored for over 50 years, so he had this depth of experience. He had 2 earned doctorates. He was a Greek scholar. He was just wonderful in the classroom. There are people who are people of great brilliance, but in a classroom, you can have trouble understanding them, but he could communicate. He had a great disposition so that he worked well with other staff. He was just a marvelous college professor. But the challenge was that he was 85. They'd had where they were one day into a new semester, one day, and he went home from teaching, sat down in the living room, had a heart attack, and passed that suddenly. So now they're in a bind. And I said, I got my start as a college professor because a college was desperate. And by desperate, I mean desperate. And so I get a call that night, and they tell me of his passing. I'm shocked, and they want me to teach some of his classes. And I'm saying, well, I've longed to do that. When would I start? They said 7:30 tomorrow morning. That was an experience. And one of the reasons they called me was he was teaching history courses. And he said, finding people to teach Bible courses in Bible college is not that big a challenge because you have all these pastors who spend so many hours in studying Scripture and all that. But history is a whole other thing. And they knew I loved the subject. And so they called me. And I literally, 7:30 the next morning, I'm teaching U.S. history. And no notes, no outlines, no anything available. So I'm just walking in teaching U.S. history cold. But this is something I spent a lot of time thinking about. And very shortly after that experience, a lady called me. Her husband had been a college professor at a secular university, and he had passed away the previous summer. And she had his library of history books. And she wanted to know if I wanted it. She wanted to put it to good use. So all of a sudden, I've got a library, considerable number of volumes on this subject, which is great. But now I have to say something about it. And I have to put it together. And I have to scramble. I have other responsibilities beside the college. So at night, I'm scrambling to put together, what am I going to say in a college classroom tomorrow? Which was uniquely a challenge. And what I wanted to try and communicate in United States history is what made the United States the United States. Okay? And you hear this just this morning. I've got the TV on in the background as I'm getting ready and at the hotel. And Good Morning America. It wasn't a very good morning for America, listening to them. And I didn't turn on that program on purpose. I was rushing back and forth between some things. I just turned the TV on to have a little background noise, and there they were, and they're discussing America and how terrible America is. How terrible shape is it, how it was all built on slavery and racism, and it's all falling apart, and everything was built by slavery and on stolen land, by slaves on stolen land, and how terrible the country is, and it's all falling apart, and so forth. And they made it sound like a place that anybody that could would want to escape. And yet, you know what our biggest problem in the United States is right now? The number of people who want to come here. And an economy, to start with, leaving aside the vetting question, what kind of people do you want? The fact is, a nation and economy, even one as large as ours, can only absorb so many people at a time, so many new people. Strange it. I don't care if they were all wonderful people. You can only absorb so many at a time. And we have had routinely over 1 million people coming legally every year. And that number that part has worked out pretty good for our country. But then you had a 4-year period where we had 20 million people come in. And it was more than our economy could absorb. And now we're in controversy over that. And not only the fact that the 1 million people coming in legally are pretty much people who've been vetted and looked at and so forth. But the fact they weren't looked at, but apart from that, says this number, because everybody wants to come to the United States. You travel, it's utterly amazing. And one of the things about traveling, and I spend probably 3 to 4 months a year in other countries, is listening to the news in those countries. Because this is what they get on the news, usually it's CNN and the British Broadcasting Company, hearing the kind of stuff I heard this morning, how terrible America is. And if you notice all the statements, we have 3 million tourists in the country right now who just came for the soccer matches. And they were all warned. I mean, they're all told if they had black or brown skin and you cross the border in, that you'll get thrown into prison and sent to prisons in other countries just because you crossed the border. And that you would be treated with violence. And they talked about, because you heard one of our senators from Massachusetts say 2 weeks ago, that thousands of children are starving to death every day in the United States. And they were concerned, warned about food shortages and all that kind of thing. And then they get here. I was sitting there interviewing this one guy, and he said, food shortages? He says, everywhere I look, there's food. I've never seen anything like this. I think it was Dinesh D'Souza who wrote back sometime that he wanted to become an American. His family was Indian background, but they wanted to come to America because in America, the poor people were fat. He said, there's no other country where poor people have a weight problem. And he said, the poor people have color televisions and air conditioning and so forth. Well, all these people, tourists coming in, were talking about how they were warned about how bad it was in the United States. And then they get here, and everything is just exactly the opposite of what they were told. And so when I first began to teach on this subject, which has been a while ago, 50 years, and first began to teach on this, this was what I wanted to address. Why do people want to come to the United States? In such a fashion that in every country, this is an issue, how we keep everybody coming. And then you look around, and one political party in the United States had just in a survey said 67% of the people thought they would be better off if they were in another country. 67%. See, have these people ever traveled outside the United States and seen what life is like, conditions are like, even in the countries that are described as being better off economically? I mean, I've been going to the Philippines for 32 years. And I've watched the economy in the Philippines prosper and improve and grow. And some wonderful things happening to it and all that, and conditions change. But still, there's no comparison to life in the Philippines, to life in the United States, as far as the conditions and the circumstances. So again, this was my background when I got to this subject. Why is it about the United States that causes the world to want to come here? And people will usually say, well, the economy. But how did we get this economy? Freedom. Well, how did we get this freedom? You have a lot of people telling you we don't have freedom, but the very fact that they're complaining so loudly publicly with no fear tells you that we do. Okay? You do not get to complain loudly like that in other countries about the rules and regulations and things. And Pastor Scudder and I had this experience sometime back, and he didn't talk about it for years, but we were in Togo, West Africa together. And he's got a drone up filming things because he's going to put this on TV. And a soldier comes up and says, where's your droning license? He says, you have to have a license to record anything by drone in Togo. And Pastor Scudder is saying, well, I don't have a license. I don't need a license. This is, your basic rights and freedom. And I can photograph what I want. The guy's saying, no, you can't. He says, I'll be back with a squad of soldiers, and we'll put you in prison. So the guy leaves. The pastor said, we got to go. Pastor saying, no, they can't do that. I said, sir, you're in a military dictatorship. They can do whatever they want. They have no sense of the rule of law or a limited government here. And he's still filming. I said, sir, it's not going to help the church any if they put both of us in prison and we have to be ransomed out. So I'm going. So I finally drag him along with me. We get up, and he's still saying we didn't need to. And then we're looking out my hotel window, and all of a sudden the plaza we were in is covered with a squad of soldiers that are looking behind every tree and every bush and everywhere. And I think, sir, you probably should stay in my room for a while, not go out in the hallways, because it's not the United States. So why do people want to come here? Most of them don't know why, except they see the results. What they're seeing the results of is some ideas about government, which largely have to do with a concept of limited government. Most of the time, we are free to do as we please, regardless of what someone in government might think or disagree with. Would you go with me to Romans chapter 13? And we'll get to this in a morning message. Our Declaration of Independence set the stage for all these incredible freedoms that we have. But the concept behind the Declaration of Independence is that there are limits on what government can do. And we're having this debate all over again right now. And you're seeing what just happened with the socialists who believe in unlimited government, winning all these elections and becoming a factor all across the country. And I just listened to Mamdani, who's become the voice of socialism this morning, and he was just claiming that about how much stronger government has to be in order to give the people everything they need. He's being interviewed, and the interviewer doesn't ask the logical question: if government is that strong, what keeps the government from taking everything from you? And look at any country in the history of the world where this has been tried and see what happens. Okay? There's a historical result. But often when you begin to talk about these kind of things, people say, Romans 13 says you got to obey whatever the government says, no matter what. And whatever government says is the will of God. But if you'd look at it, you look just a little bit closer. Romans chapter 13, verse 1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. Well, that says, see, you got to obey government no matter what. Who's the highest power? Who's the higher power? On any subject in which God has spoken, God is the higher power. The government is not always the highest power. I remember attending a trial one time, not the person on trial, but I'm attending the trial of a Baptist preacher. And the government is after him, saying that he was doing things he didn't have the right to do as a preacher and so forth. And it's federal trial, and they were having jury selection. And jury selection, they'll go through, and the attorney, on each side can say, okay, I will rule out this person, I rule out this one, and so forth, until they can agree on a group of people to be on the jury. And so they've got a group of people the attorneys have agreed on. And the judge then says, now I have a question for all of you as prospective jurors. And the judge says to them, is there anybody that thinks there's a higher authority in this courtroom than me? One elderly black man raised his hand. The judge was a lady, and he says, ma'am, he says, God's a higher authority in this courtroom than you are, and for that matter, so is the Constitution. She said, you're not eligible to serve on this jury. Man, he got it right. Whether the judge understood that or not, he got it right. Now, if you look at this, be subject to higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. I mean, it is God that gives authority. Men do not have the right to give themselves authority. It is God that gives authority. Wherefore, therefore, whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. As I see, anything government says, because we're going through this. I just came from Canada, and I was in Canada all last week, and they just passed a law in Canada that said you cannot preach from certain passages in the Bible that condemn homosexuality. So literally mentions the passages in the Bible that you cannot preach from. But the people doing the legislation weren't very smart because they didn't get all the passages. So that was the thing going on as I was up there. Okay, so we won't mention this passage and this passage and this passage today. And everybody was quick to preach from other passages that said the exact same thing. Because they had just listed specific passages as if that was the right of government to say that. Okay? Well, I'm sure somebody will amend the law before this discussion is done. But notice what it says. Rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wait, would you catch that? It didn't say rulers shouldn't be a terror to good works. It says they're not. What happens when you become a terror to good works? You lose your rights to be a ruler. That is what the whole concept of the United States was based upon. As you look at the Declaration of Independence, which we'll go into in the morning service, you'll find it is very much a religious document with 6 references to the Word of God and the principles of God. And it says when rulers are a terror to good works, they've lost their right to rule. For example, you remember the Egyptian midwives, the story of Pharaoh? They were commanded to kill any male babies born to the Jewish children. That's not an unusual thing for folks to try and blame all their problems on the Jews. That's been a part of world history from the beginning. And the midwives would save the babies alive. And then they lied to Pharaoh about it. Said, boy, those Hebrew women, they just deliver babies so quick, we couldn't get there in time. And the Bible says God blessed them for it. When an evil government told them to kill helpless babies and they refused, God blessed them for refusing that evil government. Say, man, this becomes an issue. I have here, and I saw you have some copies already, the book, and I'll refer to it again in the morning, that Pastor Scudder and I just wrote, Spiritual War Against Israel. And there's a chapter in it on Hitler and the Holocaust. And some of the things, in that chapter, the point of that chapter is one that I wrote, was to prove that the Holocaust happened, because you have significant people denying that it ever happened in our country today. And the evidence for it's overwhelming that it did happen. That's what the chapter's about. One of the things I did not get into, when the Nazi government began to do all these things, there were preachers who preached against it. And many of them suffered significantly, even being killed. But they had a responsibility that was greater than their responsibility to an evil government. 2,000 of them signed something called the Barmen Declaration that said that the government did not have Hitler's government did not have the right to rule over the churches. And many of those 2,000 were killed. Many of those 2,000 were imprisoned. But what they signed and what they said was 100% the truth. And if you look here, what it says is you don't dare resist the power. That means government doesn't dare resist the power of God. I was asked to testify in a trial in southern Indiana a few years ago. And the county was going after a church over something. And the church was allowed to bring in what they called expert witnesses. Because you know what the definition of an expert is. Anybody that crossed the state line to get somewhere, that's an expert. So I'm an expert witness on religious liberty. So, and the expert witnesses are allowed to speak 5 minutes each. And so we're in, and we're all making this statement about the limits on government, limited government, and the religious liberty, and the First Amendment, and the state First Amendment, and so forth. State version of the Religious Liberty Amendment. And we all get up and say what we have to say. County judge. The county judge says, I'm declaring a 2-hour recess. He said, I'll not leave you hanging. He said, I'll give a decision in 2 hours. And so we've got time just to go out and grab a bite to eat. It was the right time of day. And bite, eat, come back. And we come back, and we're all gathered there. And the judge makes his ruling. And he begins by saying this. He said, I believe that one day as a judge, I will stand before God and answer to God for the rulings that I make as a judge. Had it exactly right. Had it exactly right. And then he goes on to say, he goes, I do not have to want to have to answer to God for having fooled with his church. He said, case is dismissed. And I wanted to nominate him for the Supreme Court right then and there. Okay. County judge to Supreme Court might have been a big jump, but I'd have been for it. If you saw this week, our current president has a religious liberty movement, and I wish they would do more with it than they have, but what they've done is more than what's been done with it in a long time, and they just were talking this week, and they issued a report to the president, and the essence of the report was we have to have our national leadership do more to protect religious liberty in this country because it's being threatened at all kinds of different levels. So basically the report said, Mr. President, we need you to do more. And they got it exactly right. Now, key again, verse 3. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou not then be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. In other words, we should be careful what we have to do. We should do what's right. We should as citizens. We should as churches. The government should, as representatives of government, do what's right, because the government has to answer to God for what it does. And real rulers are not a terror to the good. They're a terror to the evil. We're being told today that our rulers should not be a terror to the evil. If you saw the one candidate who got nominated to run for a congressional position in New York City, I don't even think the other party is going to offer a nominee. She was asked because she's called for ending the prison system. So she was asked, are you saying it would be wrong? A person just walks out at random, sees somebody, shoots them, and kills them, to put that person in prison? She said, yes. She said, that's not how you reach people and get people to live better lives. She thought we would need to give them a lecture on better behavior rather than prison. And can you imagine living in a culture like that? You sometimes, and I lived in Chicago for 11 years, you sometimes felt like you were living in a culture like that, living in Chicago. But can you imagine living in a country like that, where rulers were never a terror to the evil, but on the other hand would be a terror to the good? If you saw last week in Chicago, preachers were arrested for street preaching in Chicago. On the same day that case was dismissed against people for gang murders, preachers got arrested for street preaching. I like to live like that. I'm not a big fan of street preaching in our day and age, and the reason I'm not a big fan of it, Street preaching was greatly used in the United States once upon a time, but you were preaching to people who were raised with certain convictions, understanding of Christianity. And so street preaching, you're just trying to get their attention to do what they already knew. That's not true today. Most of the people you're preaching to in street preaching don't have a clue. And it takes more than just challenging them to that which they already know to accomplish them. But while I'm not necessarily a big fan of it, I have street preached many, many years ago. I haven't street preached, I'll bet, in 40 years. I don't know that it's on my docket to do. But there are folks who disagree, who still think it's the right way to reach people. And it's not mine to tell them how you do and don't reach people. So I wouldn't dream of being a problem to them. And I've actually, on one particular occasion, I happened to drive by, and there were folks, a guy street preaching, and there were folks out trying to harass him. And I pulled my car between them and him, because I didn't think it was right for them to harass him for exercising his religious liberty. I also don't think it's right to use bizarre legal loopholes to turn murderers free who killed people in gang violence. The legislators and judicial people and police authorities need to live like there's a higher power than them, and they're going to answer to that higher power. See, why does everybody come to America? Because in America was founded on this concept that government is limited, and that the people would decide what limits they put on the government. And when the people put limits on government, which is all of what the Constitution is, Thomas Jefferson called it the chains on the government. The Constitution was written to tell the government what it could not do, not to tell the people what it could not do. That in such a situation, the economy flourishes because people are free to innovate and try and to fail, but also to succeed. And if through their choices they make brilliant plans and they work hard, they're free to achieve as much as, there's no limit to what they're free to achieve. And the people coming may not understand. What they're really coming is they want to live somewhere where the government is limited and it cannot interfere with their lives in all the ways the government does in the countries they're coming from. Now, some want to corrupt that. Okay? And when I say some of them come because they want to get away with murder, it's not a figure of speech. You've had entire street gangs come for that reason. Criminal gangs from other countries come here for that reason. But there many, as if I could get to America, I could provide for my family. I could make my own choices. I could do what I think is best for myself and for my family. I could worship as I choose. We have young people at Dayspring from mainland China. And one of the first things that grabbed their attention when they came here was you could pass out gospel tracts. You and I take that for granted. You probably have a tract rack out there with tracts for people to pass out. We take that for granted. To them, that was unheard of. They went crazy passing out tracts when they found out you could do that. And nobody from government is going to stop you or tell you you did something wrong or fine you or whatever. You want to know how America free is? How free America is? We have no king's rallies. Now, I personally think that's ridiculous because nobody's trying to be a king. But in a country with a king, you know what happens if you have no king's rallies? We can say anything or do anything. And we've got that right, and we forget. My point is this, and we'll get more to it in the morning. Why does the world want to come to America? Even if they don't realize what it is, they want to live where the government is limited and they can be free to decide for themselves. Years ago, had a chance to go to Suriname. We're literally out in a village that we went to by canoe. Okay? And we're out, and when you get in a village, there's only 4 people that have the authority to invite you into the village, and they have an elderly woman known as the village grandmother, and she saw me there with the 2 preachers that brought me, and she invited us in. And at one point, I'm trying to say something I haven't been given permission to say. And the chief comes over and threatens me. All I was doing was talking about the Lord. I'm an American. You know what my response was? You can't tell me to be quiet. And I'm looking over, and standing behind the chief is one of the preachers that brought me going, shut up, shut up. And so I calmed down. And they came over to me and said, did you think you were in the United States? They said, your Constitution doesn't mean anything while you're in this village. That chief can do anything to you he pleases. Shut up. Oh, hadn't thought about that. I just kind of used to being an American and being in the United States. Glory to God, the world has come here because we believe in limited government, where even government is not the highest power. And that has created the economy we have. That has created the freedom that we have. And God has created, all these tremendous things that we have and know and experience. Okay? If we lose the limits on government, we lose the freedom. We have something tremendous here to rejoice in. You say, but America's been imperfect. Of course it has. Anything put together by men is imperfect. But the United States, more than any country in the history of the world, has corrected its own imperfections as it went along. We hear a lot. We're on stolen land. I preach every year out on the Creek Indian Reservation in Oklahoma. This year, they made me an honorary Creek. I have one of their official jackets and bolos to wear when I'm preaching there next year. And they hear all this stuff, and they laugh at it. And they've driven me around the reservation, and they say, this is the housing provided by the government. This is, the hospital provided by the government. This is this provided by the government. And they said, seriously? They said, our people have it too easy. Said, what was taken from us has been repaid and repaid and repaid and repaid. Now, that doesn't defend everything that happens. There were certainly abuses in dealing with the Native Americans. But that's not the whole story. I'll close with this. You hear a lot about the Japanese concentration camps in the United States during World War II. Where Japanese people were rounded up, put in concentration camps. And that was a wrong policy. Government should never have done that. But I pastored this elderly Japanese couple in Chicago. Wonderful people. And they met in a concentration camp. They bristled at the term. They said, nobody does concentration camps like the United States does. Said, we met at an ice cream social. The lady was telling me, his church and my church had an ice cream social together. Said, when ice cream social was done, we went to the movies. And after that, he went over to play basketball at the basketball court. And said they were everything provided for them. And he said, when you say concentration camp, people think of the Nazi concentration camps. He said, no one was ever treated as well as we were when we were in that concentration camp. Glory to God. Thank God for the liberty we have. God bless you all.